Thank you, John. Welcome, everybody. I'm flattered by the number of people in the room. I always suspected John to run this organization with an iron fist. Could also be the topic. I guess it's very hard to avoid the term sustainability these days. Even the Museum of Brands is an ideal place to run sustainable events, I've just read on the toilet. So there's clearly a lot of interest in this topic. We've marketing-wise framed this as a question, as a black and white question, and as you can suspect, we will provide an answer which is obviously not black or white, but under certain circumstances, yes, it's a fact. You see three logos up here. John has mentioned I'm a professor of marketing, not sustainability, at the Innsbruck School of Management. I've been affiliated with Europanel, which is a research group in London, owned by both GfK and Kantar for almost 20 years now. And before I joined the university, I was also the CEO of a strategy consultancy. Now, the talk about sustainability, corporate social responsibility has always been a talk that either tried to trade off profit against doing good, or maybe trying to combine these two corporate goals. And I'm trying to put some light on some of the academic learnings and our own research on these topics. That sustainability is a hot topic. I don't think I need to prove. This is a piece of communication that went out by Unilever last week, where they are emphasizing that they're changing their communication towards children, because children obviously may not have the brains that we have, knowing what's good for us and what isn't. So they have arguments based on their sustainability activities. There's books out that tell you how to do proper green marketing. And this is a piece of research that we have published last year, and I'm going to present some highlights of that as well. Now, in terms of framing this topic, this is a very simplified version of most branding models that you find in textbooks. Brands try to attach certain qualities to their corporation, to their products, to their reputation, which hopefully affect the reputation of stakeholders, change behaviors, and those result in specific outcomes for the company. So if we think about sustainable branding or branding and sustainability, you add certain aspects to these activities, and typically if you read definitions of sustainability, it's about being economically sustainable, being socially sustainable, and being environmentally sustainable. So the first question clearly is, what is being done? What are the activities that the company is initiating? The second question is, does that fit to the rest of what I'm doing? And I'm going to talk a little bit about circumstances under which sustainable activities fit better or worse. Then, does this even resonate? Do people care? Do people inform themselves about those kinds of activities? And is it consequential? What kinds of outcomes can we expect? So I'm going to try to look at some of these questions throughout the next 30 minutes or so. Let's start out with what academia says about this topic. As I've said before, I'm not a professor of sustainability. There's a lot of research on sustainability initiatives, on corporate structures favoring or not favoring sustainability. I'm going to be focusing mostly on the marketing and branding consequences of sustainable behaviors. However, if we think about the first academic papers that have been published in the field, and those papers aren't that old, we have to go back about 25 years. This is the time when I wrote my PhD, also on a very similar topic. There was a big discussion going on in both economic circles but also academic circles, and I remember discussions with my colleagues in the finance department. What are organizations' responsibilities? Who are the stakeholders that they should be most concerned with? And at that time, it was basically the shareholder against everybody else. So lots of studies tried to answer the question, well, is it possible to be socially responsible and provide returns to your shareholders as well? And one of the first studies, and this was published in the book, was by Pava and Kraus, and they studied hundreds of companies, looked at what they were doing and shareholder value developments, and they found that there typically is a positive relationship. So organizations that act in a responsible way, they didn't define sustainability perfectly the same way we would do today, but organizations that have successful CSR activities tend to perform financially better. Now, those studies have been criticized a bit because it wasn't very clear which direction the causality went. Were they more successful because they implemented socially responsible activities, or were they successful enough to be able to implement socially responsible activities? So were we really looking at some sort of causality here, or was it just a correlation? Successful companies started initiatives that others simply could not afford. Another diagram that I remember from the time of my PhD, published by a management professor that some of you may know or may have known, published lots of books, Peter Doyle at Warwick University, and he came up with the idea that stakeholder interests should be balanced. So to make sure that stakeholders support you as an organization, don't give them too little, because then they will cease to support you and try to find other organizations to work with. But also don't give them too much, because then you don't have the resources to cater to these other stakeholders in a sufficient way. So his idea was mostly around trying to balance the interests of multiple stakeholders to secure the long-term growth and success of companies. A very recent paper, 2016, looked again at a large number of companies and their sustainability investments, which in many countries these days are being collected by different non-profit organizations. And what this paper found is that sustainability investments that are material, defined as necessary for the business, so investments that go directly into the core of the organization's activities, indeed enhance shareholder value, and immaterial investments, so running an event, sponsoring maybe a certain initiative, don't at least hurt them. So again, the overwhelming evidence of that paper was sustainability investments pay off when we look at shareholder value as the relevant outcome. So this is mostly around the trade-off, or the frequently hypothesized trade-off between doing good and earning money. Let's look at consumers, or the impact on consumers. While Greenpeace has been around about 20 years longer than this picture here, this was the first very publicly made attack by a non-profit organization on a brand. Up until that time, Greenpeace fought against hunting whales, for example, or drilling oils in certain areas. But in this case, that's the Brent platform in the Northern Sea, where Shell at one stage claimed they would just leave this in the sea and it's going to disappear over time anyway. Greenpeace made this very public. And this is the time where researchers started picking up consumer reactions to corporate good doing or corporate bad doing. And most papers at the outset agreed that if you do bad, consumers are going to be mad. And they will stop buying from you, they will be talking negatively. This paper here runs a set of experiments where people are primed that a specific company has done something bad from a sustainability perspective, and then people judge the product quality or the likelihood they would be purchasing these products, and they found negative impact of bad CSR activities on product evaluation. So one key learning here is if you do bad, people tend to not be excited. Now, how long these effects persist is a different question. There have been studies that BP, after the spill in the Gulf of Louisiana, experienced downturns in sales for several weeks, but recovered fairly quickly. This is a more recent example. I don't know if any of you have seen this paper, this picture. This is by a manager of Qatar Airways, and he found a flight attendant slightly drunk in the corner of a hotel, and instead of telling this flight attendant, this is not good behavior, he took a picture and put it on social media, publicly blaming the person. Now, you would think that people are getting fed up by this kind of, let's say, not very, I'm lacking the English word, but I think we all agree that this is probably not the type of behavior a manager should exhibit. Qatar Airways still won the best airline awards for the next few years. So again, you may question whether people are punishing every type of bad corporate behavior. So let's look at more recent research, particularly looking at brand equity and consumer reactions. This is a study published about 6 or 7 years ago, looking at 57 global brands. And what this study tried to investigate was the extent to which organizations engage in different sustainable behaviors, and they split this into activities towards different stakeholder groups and the interbrand brand equity value that is published every year. So they were particularly interested in which types of sustainable behaviors enhance the equity of brands. And what they found is all of these activities have a positive impact. So sustainability activities towards the community, customers, corporate governance, employees, and suppliers. And they took this from a database called SGP. All of those enhance brand equity. I think the one key finding that they had was a very strong interaction of efforts towards customers and the community. So companies that do something towards the local communities in which they do business benefit even more from sustainability efforts towards customers. And the authors claim that, well, customer activities give you visibility, because this is something that is typically portrayed on social media, reported by the press, but community efforts give you credibility, because the people that live nearby the organization or work for the organization enhance those activities by making them more credible, by talking positively about those things. And just to give you an idea, those are the kinds of activities that this database up here collects regarding community activities. And I'm not saying that any brand should be doing all of this, but I think this paper provides very strong evidence that if you want to be perceived as a sustainable company, and if you want these activities to also enhance brand equity, don't forget about the local community in which you do business. This is another piece of research that looked at specific consumer characteristics. So who are the people that are particularly susceptible to CSR activities? Now that's probably not very surprising. People with a high level of personal and social responsibility, public self-consciousness, meaning they think about how they are being perceived by others, tend to be more positive towards social activities, and in particular, more positive towards causes relating to minorities. For any type of charitable cause, people who are in general trusting others, who score high on religious beliefs, have a strong social network, are reacting more positively towards charitable activities. And also, and I think this is the least surprising one, if you yourself have shown previous charitable contributions, you're also more likely to think positively about organizations that do something in this field. One interesting finding of this study, however, was that charitable activities or cause-related marketing is most effective for companies that produce products that are visible. Because clearly then I can show that I'm buying consciously, I'm choosing products from companies that are supporting social causes, that are acting sustainably. So if you have a product that is publicly visible, it's easier to translate sustainability efforts into sales figures. Whereas if you have a product that is less publicly perceived or in a business-to-business market, then, well, it's a little bit more difficult. People are not going to pick up on your activities as easily because purchasing from you does not tell as much about these people as purchasing from a company with a publicly visible product. Another interesting piece of research, and now we're coming into the field, what kinds of categories or what kinds of products benefit, is this paper in the Journal of Consumer Research. And what this paper investigates is whether a company actively says, look, we have an innovation that is more sustainable, or whether a company says, look, we have increased the performance of a product and it's also more sustainable. And what they found is that if you strive to make a more sustainable product and you communicate that this is why you've changed the product, people are reacting to this less positively than if you communicate this as a side effect. Now, clearly the authors have thought about why that's the case, and the reasoning that they found and that they then tested through experiments was if you intentionally go green, so if you tell your R&D department, do something which is sustainable, you must be trading this off against something else. You must be sacrificing other qualities that people could look for. And those are some examples here. So Budweiser, when they introduced the aluminum can, and this was at a time where people, or most people, thought that an aluminum bottle is more sustainable than a glass bottle. They said, well, it's better for the taste of the beer. It keeps the beer well tasting for a longer time. And by the way, it's also more sustainable. So the main thrust of the argument was you get better beer, but you're also doing something good for the environment. BMW has an initiative they call BMW Efficient Dynamics, which tends to be largely around saving fuel, lower CO2 emissions, but most of their advertising says it's also helping the dynamism of driving this car. It accelerates faster, it's a more exciting car, but you're also reducing the grams of CO2. So they're emphasizing their core brand values, the dynamic driving, but luckily it's also helping the environment. Same with Apple when they launched an aluminum case, which was lighter, more durable. They said it's also better for the environment than other metals we used before. And this is an example where, and I hope no one from Method is here, which counteracts this finding here, because basically they said, we keep the planet in mind with every bottle we design, But the learning from this study would be that something must have suffered in terms of product quality because these guys were emphasizing or were forcing their R&D department to think mostly in terms of sustainable benefits. So the conclusion here is maybe distance yourself from, or distance the product from the socially beneficial enhancements so that people don't make this connection, okay, this is now more sustainable, so they must have reduced their quality efforts. So this is one of those findings. Another one, looking at product categories, was a study that looked at strength and the efficacy of products. And this study started out by arguing that helping others, supporting others, is a sign of persons that are able to see the suffering of other people, and therefore maybe persons that are more gentle or maybe weaker. Whereas people who don't help others are strong and powerful. I know those are stereotypes, but they thought, well, let's investigate this. And you can't see this very well. How do sustainable practices impact the quality perception of, say, a product where strength is clearly important versus a product where gentleness is more in the foreground? And they ran one study, and don't bother about the exact numbers here, but what they showed is that a baby shampoo benefits much more from being strong than a car shampoo. Baby shampoo benefits much more from being sustainable than a car shampoo because baby shampoos are supposed to be gentle, whereas car shampoos are not necessarily supposed to be gentle but strong. They then replicated this, and this is nicely in line with something I showed before. In a student restaurant at a university, they provided a pair of hand sanitizers, and one of them was labeled as being sustainable, and the other was not being labeled as sustainable. And they had people, when walking out, they allowed people to just use one of the two sanitizers, and most students chose the non-sustainable one because that's the one that is stronger, right? And for a sanitizer, I want this to be strong, not to be gentle. But if somebody was standing right next to the table observing you making this decision, suddenly people switched over to the sustainable sanitizer. So again, publicly visible, I tend to act more sustainable than if not, especially if we're talking about product categories where strength matters. Finally, this is a piece of research that a colleague in the Netherlands has conducted, and she was interested whether specific product categories benefit more or less from, in this case, a label organic. So in the milk example, who thinks that the organic product is preferred on average over the non-organic product? Okay, a few of you. In the chocolate example, how many people think? Also, okay. So the key learning here was this is the clearly preferred product. This is the clearly preferred product. And the explanation these authors came up with is that, okay, if I'm interested in enjoyment, in pleasure, then my mind isn't that interested in being sustainable. So when you drink beer, when you drink wine, when you eat French fries, you know that you're not doing something good for yourself. So that part of your mind that thinks about consequences is a little bit reduced, whereas for virtue foods, like yogurt and vegetables, it enhances the virtue of these products. So again, when we think about product categories that are more or less suitable for sustainability claims, virtue categories tend to perform better than vice categories. This is a recent initiative. I would have retrieved UK numbers, but they are not yet present in the UK. But this is a survey amongst consumers in Scandinavia, where they ask people, are you typically frequently discussing sustainability issues? And we can see that this is a topic that is on the rise, not surprisingly. We also see that people at least claim they would be willing to pay substantial premia for buying sustainable products. Again, those are somewhat hypothetical questions. We all know that in real life, very few people are in fact willing to pay these premia, but at least people are pretending that sustainability is important, and some people indeed may act accordingly. And I'll show this in a second. Just one quick piece of information from the same study, this time in the Netherlands. This is the top 10 sustainable brands in the Netherlands, and I think it's quite an interesting choice here. Also fascinating that chocolate here is number one, even though I've just shown in an example that people don't value sustainability in chocolate. I don't know if you know Tony's Chocolonelys. I think it's now become pretty prominent, and they are, I think, quite successful in showing that certain vice categories can use sustainability very well. And you can also see that there's a couple of brands up there where sustainability is part of their DNA, and also some other brands that have done a fairly good, maybe even surprising job to link their brands to sustainability. This is the study we published a year ago, and this was the BG20 summit that John referred to. So, yeah, pretty much 9 months ago, we ran a global study in 25 countries asking consumers from our household panel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with GfK and Kantar, but they run household panels in a number of countries globally, and we asked these consumers who are also reporting their purchasing to us about a number of topics regarding sustainability, their attitudes, and a specific focus of this survey was the topic plastics, because last year this was one of the top discussion points amongst sustainability topics. So one of the questions that we asked is, what is your number one most concern regarding the global environment? Not surprisingly, climate change and plastic waste ended up number 1 and 2. But those rankings do differ by region. So if you go into China, for example, food safety becomes much more important. If you go into South America, water issues become much more important. But indeed, especially in Western Europe, climate change and plastic are of particular importance. Now, do people who claim that they are particularly concerned about plastic, who tell us in those surveys that they've cut down on the number of plastic bottles that they purchase, indeed buy less? Now, we're obviously able, whether people are just lying to us or are indeed behaving this way. So if you compare the people that tell us that they are always avoiding buying drinks in plastic bottles versus they're not doing this, you see massive differences in the household's purchases of product categories like carbonated mineral water, colas, or other flavored carbonates, which tend to come to a large degree in plastic bottles. So people who are concerned are indeed exhibiting different behaviors that are evidence of more sustainable action. We also ask people who should be in charge of reducing plastics. And in this case, and we gave people one option only. It's not that people think it's just this group or just this group, but who's the number one group that should take action? Almost half of the respondents think that manufacturers should bear responsibility to reduce plastics. followed by the government, followed by consumers, and the smallest group says it's the retailers who should act. There's various ways to interpret this. One way is obviously there's a big opportunity. People think manufacturers should be doing something. If you do something, you would expect that people react in a positive way. Now, who do people think are the top manufacturers to do something against plastic? Most people don't know a name. So when asking people, can you name a manufacturer that is doing a great job in reducing plastics? 90% cannot name a single brand or manufacturer, and also over 80% cannot name a retailer. And those were two separate questions. So this space is still out there for brand manufacturers to own. There is not a clear set of brands that are owning the sustainability space, and it's surprising because we're talking about a product category that everybody purchases, that people tend to think about quite a bit. It's not a product category that only a few people are concerned with. Those would be the three top brands in the UK, and you probably have all a reasoning why it's one brand or the other, but none of them exceeds 2% of our responses. A couple of final remarks. We've created consumer segments based on how important they think the plastic issue is and how much they do about plastics, and we've called them the eco-actives, believers, considerers, dismissers. I'm not going to go into detail, but obviously those people are most concerned about plastic and claim to do the most. Those are least concerned. What you see is that this group is bigger in Western Europe than in other markets, and in many other markets, as I've said, plastic is not the main issue. It's a surprisingly small group, and I don't have a slide on this, but what's also surprising is that as people get younger, they're more likely to belong to one of these groups. So the general feeling that it's young people who are particularly concerned did not prove true in our study. I've just read a piece, I think 2 weeks ago in the Times, that called this young generation the generation hot air. So they're talking a lot, but they're not really acting. And maybe on a side note, as I've said, I'm a university professor. I wanted to do an exam last week with my class for those who failed the course in the winter term. And out of the 10 people who would have had to do it, 8 of them told me, sorry, I can't make it. I'm in Southeast Asia. So again, good. Do we see differences in actual behavior? Yes, we do see that people who are particularly active tend to buy relatively less fresh meat, less frozen meat, less carbonated soft drinks, less bottled water. They also tend to strongly over-index on organic food and organic dairy. So we do see a part of the market out there that is behaving very sustainably, and it's probably this part of the market that is supposed to lead the pack in a development towards more sustainability. I'm almost at the end. This is an interesting piece that I found just yesterday that says corporate transformations are difficult. We may all know this from our own experience. 12% achieve or exceed their aims. For sustainability initiatives, the figure is just 2%. So 1 out of 50 companies says their sustainability efforts work out as planned. 49 out of 50 say we didn't reach the goals we had. One of the reasons that Bain Research brings forward is that leadership very often is enthusiastic or claims to be enthusiastic, but it doesn't give the frontline employees enough power, enough leeway to act in that way. And lots of people in the frontline reported, look, I don't dare to make a decision that may not be ideal for a short-term business success because, or may endanger our short-term business target, but meets our sustainability targets because I know the negative repercussions that are going to hit me. So I think this is evidence that if top management just tells that sustainability is important but doesn't allow the people to walk the talk, it is very difficult to actually be successful. Finally, an academic paper again. What these authors argue is that organizations who are serious about sustainability should be starting with their strategic and operational homework. So what are the issues that we want to tackle? How are we going to tackle them? How are we going to measure whether we're successful? And only once you're sure that you have achieved positive sustainability outcomes, start communicating and start using this success in your branding. They give various examples of organizations that start the other way around. Look, we're doing amazing on sustainability, and we're just starting a few initiatives. Then those initiatives don't work out, which means you're going to lose any credibility. So branding in terms of sustainability comes last, not first, which may be a reason why Mr. Bezos got a lot of bad press for giving $10 billion to climate change initiatives, but not trying to change any of the processes at Amazon, which supposedly, and I'm not an expert, are not always helpful to save the environment. So I think we could say, yes, brand success through sustainability is a fact if you do it right. If you're serious about it and you're not just talking about it. So make sure this is the path for your organization that is supported by the various stakeholders that matter. Be very careful about injecting sustainability claims or promises in your products only. Some products may not be ideal for sustainability claims because they lose credibility, they lose performance, perception. Where sustainability should start, ideally, is on a brand or on a company level once you've proven that you're serious about it and can show it. So I think this illustrates it nicely where Unilever has gone out to the marketplace with a sustainable living plan and not just launched specific products that claim to be green. Thank you very much.